at a sitting of the Senate on the 3rd of February 2004, the motion that was agreed to by the Senate included the appointment of a joint select committee to deal with this matter. At a sitting of the Senate,
one and all, as we convene this public hearing of the Joint Select Committee on National Security of the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, pursuant to this committee's inquiry into the key issues and recommendations of the final report of the Police Manpower Audit Committee. Let me indicate immediately that this hearing is being broadcast live on Channel 11 and Parliament Radio 105.5 FM and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. I particularly want to welcome, though belatedly, with our deepest apologies for the inconvenience caused to you, the members of the Police Manpower Audit Committee. Some of the members of this committee were obliged to be elsewhere in public service, and we have just been released from those responsibilities, so we are now happily with you. I would like, therefore, led by you, Mr. Chairman, Professor Ramesh Deosaran, to, for the record and for the benefit of the viewing and listening public, to introduce yourself and cause your colleagues of the committee to introduce themselves. I thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your welcome. I am Chairman, as you know, of the Police Manpower Audit Committee, and I have with me the members. I must apologize for Mr. Ramisa, who has an unavoidable appointment, Ms. Jacqueline Wilson, who is abroad, and there is another member who is obviously missing. I would now like to invite the other members to introduce themselves, starting from the right of myself, Ms. Dr. Obiako Guy from Tobago.
Good afternoon, members of the Joint Select Committee on the Trinidad and Tobago Manpower Audit. I am Dr. Levis Guy Obiako. I am the representative of the Tobago House of Assembly, and by profession, I'm an international security consultant.
Good afternoon. I am Harold Phillip, Acting Commissioner of Police.
And on my immediate left, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Zamir Mohammed from the University of Trinidad and Tobago.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alan Miguel, and I'm an attorney at law.
Thank you very much. Well, for the record as well, I am Fitzgerald Ethelbert Hines, Member of Parliament, Laventille West, and Chairman of this committee, and I would like to invite my colleagues, beginning on my right, to introduce themselves for your and the viewership's and listenership's benefit.
Good afternoon, Committee. Paul Richards, Member.
Good afternoon, Robert Lahunt, Member.
Good afternoon, Saddam Hussein, Member.
Good afternoon, Nicole Olivier, Member.
Good afternoon, I am Randall Mitchell, Member.
Good afternoon, I'm Nigel De Freitas, Member.
In the case of Mr. Lehunt and Mr. Randall Mitchell, both are sitting for the first time, so we would like, and Mr. Saddam Hussein, of course, yes, we would like to particularly welcome you. We welcome as well members of the media, and we are supported, this committee, by a very able unit of the Parliament, led, of course, by the Clerk of the House of Representatives, Madam Jackie Sampson Miguel, and Robert Johnson Greenidge, and others and of course Mr. Ramadar, Mr. Prakash Ramadar, the vice chair of this committee, is unavoidably absent. Let me indicate, as we press on, what are the objectives of this inquiry. They are as follows. 1, to consider the findings and recommendations of your committee's final report, so-called the final report of the Police Manpower Audit. Secondly, to hold consultation hearings with relevant stakeholders on the recommendations of your committee with a view of identifying promptly an implementation roadmap. The reason for that is because we witnessed, Professor Deosaran and your team, your handing over of your final report to the Honorable Prime Minister, who made the request of you and put in place your committee. And we took note of the fact that you were at pains to indicate that there have been many reports regarding police organization, the police organization, over many years, and many of the recommendations of those reports remain yet to be addressed. We took note as well of the fact that you indicated to the Prime Minister that you did not want your effort, your commendable effort, your commendable work, as promptly as you delivered it, with tremendous personal, professional, and other sacrifice, no doubt, on the part of you and all of your members. We noted that you indicated that you didn't want this work, not only for your sake, but for the sake of the police organization and for the sake of Trinidad and Tobago, to find itself among the lot collecting dust and possibly cobwebs someplace. It is with that in mind that we decided we'll convene the meeting that we now share and to move promptly into discussions with you and other key stakeholders, as I've just indicated, with a view of promptly identifying an implementation map so that your goals, your dreams, your desires will be materialized in the shortest possible time. I might add that the Chief Executive Officer of Trinidad and Tobago, the Honorable Prime Minister, he wants to see precisely that, and that is added impetus for us to continue this work. So, I would like, directing this particularly to you, Professor Deosaran, to render some brief opening comments, perhaps about how you came into this space, how the idea of this manpower report came as you understand it, and some other brief comments for the benefit of this committee and, of course, those who listen and view this broadcast. Thank you.
Chairman, let me once again thank you for welcoming myself and my committee. I also want to express our appreciation to your parliamentary colleagues for granting us this special hospitality on a matter that is so vital to the welfare of this country. This police manpower audit was a necessity whose time has come. The prevailing circumstances in the country in terms of public safety, personal safety, national security, these issues have become so critical that it was, as I said, necessary to establish a ground-level police manpower audit so as to help guide the police as to what they should do to improve safety and national security across the country. This audit follows, as you rightly said, several similar reports, except that this one has a substantial extent of data, authentic stakeholders' opinions, to to the point where it can be called a very reliable report to help guide public policy and the police service in an improvement mission. You are quite right, Mr. Chairman. When we handed this report to the Honorable Prime Minister, we did express our concern as to what has happened to several reports, starting from the Lee report, the Victor Bruce report, the O'Dowd Scotland Yard report, the drug report, the Scott drug report, more recently the Ostrowski report. And we have seen what has happened to those reports, some of them costing millions of dollars. We thought, for no other reason than out of concern for public safety and national security, that our report, the report from this police manpower audit, should not suffer a similar fate. We were bold enough to make that concern to the Prime Minister, and quite rightly and properly, he did respond by pledging that this report will not suffer such a fate. So we were refreshed by such a response, and now we are very grateful for the opportunity to assist in whatever additional ways that this committee and myself could assist. And for the record, just to complete the record, I am a professor of criminology and public safety so far.
Thank you very, very much, Professor. I would like to remind colleagues, particularly those who have just joined us, that any questions are to be directed through the chair. And when you are about to ask a question or speak, you must ensure that the right-hand button on the instrument in front of you is depressed so that you would be properly heard and recorded. It will reflect itself with the red light, of course. So we thank you very much, Professor. And we will now, I should go first, to ask specifically, Professor, to give some comments on the work of the committee and what were some of the general findings that you would have encountered in this work. Of course, you are free to indicate to any of your co-committee members to elaborate on any matter. Ours this afternoon is to hear from you some of the key issues of your findings and some of your key recommendations. We had the benefit, every one of us, not of only reading, but studying this document. And we are aware that there's a deep public interest in this work. So while we may have had the benefit of reading it, many might not have, including officers of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service who this directly concerns. So we would like you, with those things in mind, to tell us about some of the findings and some of your recommendations as broadly or as narrowly as you think fit. We are now in your hands.
It is helpful to provide this distinguished committee and yourself with some overarching statements. We approach our task with the seriousness that the mission deserves. Public safety is, as I said, a very critical concern to the national community and several previous governments. Governments have had tremendous difficulty in dealing with this very challenging issue. So we thought that we would produce a report that is as data-driven as possible within the limited time that we had, and may I add, with the limited resources that we also had. But we never allowed those restraining conditions to stop us from producing what we thought should be a very helpful report. At the cover of the volume 1 are two significant statements which should help drive the mission of implementing policies. One is, now is the time. If we lose this opportunity, the committee and myself have a fear that things will not only get worse, but it will be a long time, if at all, for us to recover from the crime challenges facing the country. The Prime Minister has told us at our first meeting that there should be no sacred cows. And that is an important consideration in the content of Volumes 1 and Volume 2. We have dared to uncover and to discover the facts as we have found them. And you would find by implication there are areas of responsibilities, both personal and systematic, that must be attended to with utmost urgency. We therefore indicate the facts, make our report to assist primarily the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. We have done the diagnostics as far as we could have reached, but we now operate as a friendly ambulance to help save what is, of course, a police service filled with several deficits. But we are not magicians to have overnight solutions. We depend a lot on the relevant authorities to consider, implement some of the recommendations in the shortest possible time, about which you have just asked me. May I say, Mr. Chairman, especially since this matter is now in the public domain, that we have tried to be as creative as possible, because in moving forward, we couldn't depend solely, or even largely so, on existing structures and the traditional way of doing public safety demands. We have come not merely as mechanics to fix a system, but we have come as engineers to reform the system in its particular ways. Later on, we might speak about more precisely what those areas are. But I want to take the opportunity, before I miss it, to thank all the stakeholders who have willingly come before us to give evidence, information, 100 or so of them, from the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Chief Magistrate, senior officers of the Immigration Department, senior officers from the Customs Department, Forensic Science Department. We have had dozens of them, past Ministers of National Security, past Commissioners of Police, Chambers of Commerce, over 5 of them, and that should give you an idea of the strength and the authenticity of the opinions, the views that we have used to generate this report. In other words, Mr. Chairman, we haven't gotten up one morning and delivered these recommendations. We have listened, we have searched, we have gotten data, we have read several reports and matters of that kind to come up both with content and recommendation. Mainly because we feel that the issue is so serious that the authorities, particularly the government and parliament, must be given information as the highest possible quality so as to help guide public policy. We have held about 80 meetings, about 30 full committee meetings, interviews, so that commitment to labor, we hope, will find justification in the implementation. So, Chairman, I think I now come to some of the key issues. There are numerous issues, some of them worthy of priority consideration. Some of them are so enmeshed with others that they are parallel concerns. The issue of corruption in the police service, the issue of discipline, the human resource system, the deficiencies in promotion and in staff appraisals, the question of integrating the various intelligence units, the demand for having cameras and other such equipment properly lodged to assist police investigations and evidence gathering, which brings me to the relatively low detection rate. The question of public confidence is remarkably low. What we have found too, apart from the other governance issues like appointing a police commissioner and deputy, we have found a strong need for interagency collaboration. For example, public safety and the general area of crime doesn't belong only to the police service, Mr. Chairman. The need for integrating with the Customs Department, immigration department, the prisons are all part of public safety. And the extent to which one or more of these agencies are deficient, so will overall police work be affected. So we thought that the time has come to have not an informal relationship. For example, the relationship between the intelligence agencies seems somewhat too informal. We need a more strengthening institutional arrangement of a more compulsory nature. For example, the relationship between the prisons and the police have to be more tightened in several respects, as the evidence would show. We are also concerned, if I may add, the tendency to have leaks in police investigations. We have our evidence from reliable authoritative persons, for example, that when an investigation or a raid, as you might say, is planned, the leaks come so quickly that before the police arrive at the scene of investigation, the target groups are already notified. So what we are saying is that whilst the numbers in terms of manpower are there are several subversive conditions that distort the execution of that manpower number. So it is not only a matter of numbers, it is a matter of quality of service and the various encumbrances that adversely affect police performance. May I also take the opportunity to comment on something which also affects police performance? And we have heard this from several key stakeholders, particularly the chambers of commerce, the DPP, and other related agencies. The time has come to take a serious review, and we are not saying just a look, at the alliances between politicians, gang members, and so-called community leaders. The issue is serious enough because with that kind of alliance, you create a monster, an evil monster, that has turned into a Frankenstein, which put the security services and the public generally on the defensive by these so-called gang leaders and community leaders. And I don't have to elaborate much more until it's necessary, but I think we all know enough about what has been happening from one government to the next to be bold enough to put this troublesome issue on the agenda, because it does subvert effective policing. The police become caught in the middle of this horrendous growing Frankenstein. So we need to put it as gently as possible without removing the seriousness that the matter deserves.
Professor,
we feel
I hate to disrupt your wonderful train of thought, though I know, given your experience and academic backbone, I can hardly do that. But I must. I would like, for the benefit of the listeners and viewers, if you would, at this juncture, elaborate on that issue so that we can better understand this matter that you handle so gingerly, this relationship between politicians and gang leaders, and how, even with examples, and you have people next to you on that committee you can speak, how that affects policing. I want to understand that.
I will give a headline response that I would ask one or two of my colleagues to elaborate. When you have these alliances, for example, in a specific case of engineering certain contracts for appeasing potential or current criminals, I think when the police investigate a crime committed by any one of such criminals, the police get either sidetracked or obstructed in several ways. That is, it is entering into a terrain that is almost untouchable. We are surprised, the general community is surprised, that this alliance could have been organized for such a long time, and it does continue. I'm not speaking about present, but it has continued, and it does affect effective policing in the particular sense I mentioned in terms of police initiating an investigation, and such people there is quite often or not political intervention, and the target groups feel so empowered enough so as to even challenge the police in executing their duty. I don't know if Mr. Phillip could add something to what I said, being the senior officers in the police service. Mr. Phillip?
What I would say is that the professor have in fact raised an issue, and certainly historically there has always been a degree of perception that between governments, some of those persons who are in fact leaders of criminal groups and so on, they seem to be rewarded in many ways in terms of government contracts, and in so doing, their allegiances in terms of persons who support them, be it gang members, associates, whatever, they seem to have resources that allow them to continue being involved in criminal activities. They invest quite a substantial number of their resources into criminal activity. This is what I would want to see.
Yeah, I'm coming to the specific recommendations. I might appear to be taking a bit long, but I want to give you the context before I perhaps put forward our recommendations. We can help such people, whether you call them gang members now, or delinquents, or criminals. We have to learn how to help them, but you cannot escape in a democracy from the role of personal responsibility. Not because a young man wasn't hugged up by his mother, he can feel free to go and shoot people. That environmental explanation is appropriate up to a point. After that, every citizen in this country must be able to make a choice and to stand the consequences of that choice. Otherwise, you end up with a defective democracy. People feel democracy is only about freedom, but I don't want to go too much into that realm, but just to make the point that it is time that young men and adults in this country understand the role of personal responsibility. And we have been losing that along the way to the point where every crime has an explanation, either it's poverty or parenthood. And whilst that may be true to some extent, the Constitution doesn't allow those to have too free a way in excusing crime. We have a Constitution, we have regulations for law and order, we have a judiciary, and they must play their secular role. That is, apart from being spiritual and ask God to forgive you, we have come to a very serious point now where the Constitution, the regulations for the police service, and all such things must be put on fast track so as to stop the flow of criminality in this country by making an excuse for every crime. Whilst you will help these young men and women, whilst you might help the adult population from staying away from crime, they too must have a personal responsibility to make the proper choice in their career path or in their lifestyle. They cannot be depending so totally, as it would appear, on government resources. Government has a role to play under Section 53 or so, I think, in the Constitution. Parliament has a role to play in terms of the public safety of this country. And that is the role that we expect all the agencies under the Constitution to play. And the public, the citizens must also recognize they have a role to play in terms of their personal safety and executing their responsibility for their lives. In coming to the recommendations, Mr. Chairman, we have several recommendations, as I said earlier on. Some could be prioritized, but most of them are of what is called collateral. They all belong to one another for a fulsome outcome. For example, we thought the recruitment system in the police service is rather shortchanged. There are deficits, primarily in terms of the entry qualifications, in terms of your continued assessment, in terms of induction, continuous education, and so on. We recommend that there be a higher level of entry qualifications. We recommend that there be a pre-service system, training system, rather than in-service training system. The implication for that recommendation is that once somebody takes pre-service training, like a teacher, that person is committed to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. That is, he couldn't jump out and jump in as he would want. He would have made a career commitment by pre-service training to have a certificate, diploma, and so on that is appropriate to the requirements of effective policing. So that is one recommendation. In one of the universities, for example, the University of Trinidad and Tobago, to undertake that mission, higher level training and recruitment, and making policing and security generally a career path. It will have the required commitment. It would help ensure further integrity and so on, just as you perhaps have with teacher training, the teacher training system, pre-service. We also have, which is a very critical recommendation, we have found, Mr. Chairman and members of Parliament, a very defective human resource system in the police service. The human resource system in the police service or in any other organization is a foundation for performance. If your record keeping is deficient, if your database is deficient, you couldn't really implement your policies with the effectiveness, your programs with the effectiveness that they deserve. And that is the situation in the police service. It has arisen for several reasons. There is no equipment to use in the computer, which has not been using. There is a cabinet decision which asked some years ago that the human resource system in the police service be decentralized. That has not been done. So there are reasons for the inefficiency. And this is not a matter of a personality castigation in the service. This is a systemic weakness. You also have civilianization in the police service. Some years ago, it was 200 of civilians to assist the police to go out and patrol, to increase visibility on the streets, to build public confidence. That has not happened to the extent expected by having civilians in the police service. The number of civilians now in the police service, Mr. Chairman, is almost 1,000, and still the expected output and improved police performance has not yet been forthcoming. Now, one of the explanations for that deficiency are twofold. One is that the civilians operate under a dual governance model. The police commissioner has some jurisdiction over them, and the public service commissioner has some jurisdiction over them. Now, that is a confusing state of affairs. This matter should have been remedied many years ago rather than piling civilians upon civilians in the police service. The other issue is that it seems from reliable sources that what the Public Service Commission does is to just put each and everybody inside the police service without examining the appropriate competence required. So very briefly, Mr. Chairman, these are some of the conditions that have put the police service itself. In other words, while we can accuse, even blame the police service for certain deficiencies, there are preceding conditions that contribute to that deficiency, some of them outside the police service itself. Because if, for example, you have guns, and the seizure of guns, as announced by the police service, number 600, 700. But the fundamental issue is how and where are these guns coming in? What is the role of the Customs Department? What is the related role of immigration in these respects? But the bottom line falls on the laps of the police. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, what we are saying, what my committee and myself are saying is that whilst the police has some responsibility, there are also collateral agencies that must apply themselves properly and be inquired to. The question of staff appraisal is very deficient in the police service. We have asked about 500 police officers in our survey, are you satisfied with the staff appraisal process? Over 70% of them said no, and they explain why. We asked them, and this is dealing with the morale in the police service now. What is the extent of favoritism in the police service? This is getting inside the belly of the beast, as it were. Favoritism is almost 90%. Yes, very often. So there are morale issues, there are structural issues, and there are process issues. I will now pause, Mr. Chairman, to invite my other members if they would like to say anything on their own or to add to what I've just said. Dr. Guy, anything? Or not yet?
Not yet, Chairman of the Manpower Audit Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon again, committee. I guess I could start with Professor Desiran on this and the other members who may feel they can add value to this part of the conversation. I want to stay on the human resource management issue. Professor Desiran, you indicated that the issue of entry qualifications, the HRM issues in particular, entry qualifications, induction, training, continuous training, assessment, promotion, rewards, and discipline. One of the issues that has been highlighted, as the committee noted, key recommendations was for the human resource unit of the TTPS to begin use of the human resource portal. I'm presuming this is the digital portal, which was developed and customized to suit the human resource needs of the TTPS. Given the shortcomings that you've outlined in terms of HRM practices or lack of best practices, were you able to identify the reasons, because these are not new issues identified in the TTPS, specifically related to HRM issues, that the service, in particular the leadership, has not been able to implement more of a best practice model in terms of human resource management in the service?
You're asking a question about leadership in the police service.
And implementation of best practice, given that this is not the first time. This report is very comprehensive, but we've heard of HRM issues in terms of the management of the human resource aspect of the police service. And what would be the reasons the leadership may have given, or the rank and file, for a lack of implementation of even seemingly a modicum of best practice to move the service forward?
We, as well as stymied by that lack of application, as it were, in that you have, to some extent, the equipment to improve the efficiency and delivery of your human resource system. And we wondered why. We stated the problem, and it appears to be a leadership problem. Whether it's a leadership problem from the civilian side, the police service side, or both, is a matter that needs further investigation. But the fact is, the human resource system, including implementation of the cabinet decision to decentralize, those things have not been done. So we are saying, in response to your question, this is a problem of immediate concern requiring urgent attention. And in that pursuit, we might well find out more reasons as to why this thing has not been applied.
Do you get the impression,
at this point, it is a leadership issue?
Do you get the impression, with that said, that it is a lack of capacity and competence to elicit change, the changes that are needed, or is it a lack of will, given the resources to move things forward?
Well, when I say leadership, I include both the requirements that you mentioned, both in terms of the skill and the other issue that you raised. But it must be inspired by leadership. If there are gaps in either skill or physical resources, I think the leadership must apply itself to heal those breaches.
Is there any other member who wants to make a contribution to that issue?
Good afternoon. Just quickly, when in the report, we got clearly the level of dissatisfaction within the police service, or people's perception, at least on page, when they asked the question, what was the perception that the public had, or they felt that the public had of the police service, etc. What I was wondering, did we do any benchmarking? Or do we have any international statistics, or did your committee look at any international statistics of other police services and just find out what was considered to be acceptable levels? Because you'll always have dissatisfactions. Do we have, for example, what is a benchmark that would have so that we could have been comparing what was here versus a benchmark? Do we have anything like that at all? Or was
the comparisons we looked at, and that was mainly done by what we had an implementation team. When we were first appointed, we were given a deadline. We were appointed in January the 15th or so, and we were given a deadline for a final report March the 31st. When we examine the terms of reference, we find them so extensive and demanding that we wrote the cabinet asking for an extension. We also pointed out that all members of the committee have full-time employment or full-time occupation elsewhere. And we recommended the hiring of an implementation team which will do the research, especially along the lines you're asking, and to which I will reply in a short while. That research team is the team that went into the police service, they checked the balance books, the finances, overtime, sick leave, vacation, and they reported to us. They were given a termination of July the 31st. And as I could recall, we finished our final report on September the 30th, or thereabouts, and handed it to the Prime Minister and Cabinet on October the 15th or so. In answer to your question, yes, they did some comparative work. And they found our low confidence measure is relatively much higher. It's much higher than almost all of the other agencies they have examined. In other words, we are out of sync. It is too high to tolerate compared to other agencies across the world. You are right, in every organization, even in a family, there'll be some discontent. But it can only be so much for it to be tolerated in serving the purpose of the institution, and we have found that particular measure too high to be longer tolerated.
Okay. Dr. Oyebeka, it seems that you wanted to make a contribution to the HRSU just now.
Pardon me, sir?
Was I mistaken? Dr. Guy Obiako.
No, sir.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, through you, if I could ask a question. Just in relation to the HR issues as put forward by Senator Richards, I want to ask Mr. Phillips, just for my clarification, and I guess for any other member of the public, what is the real difference between an SRP and a regular police officer? When I was reading the report, it alluded to the SRPs going through a different training program or different process in relation to the total Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and then the police service, regular police officers going through, I guess, a more rigorous process. So what is the real difference between those two, a SRP and a police officer?
Well, there are two acts that govern these two officers. So the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service Act 1501 governs the Trinidad and Tobago, the TTPS officer, and then we have the Special Reserve Act 1503 that governs the Special Reserve officer. So there are certain clear criteria laid down under the Police Service Act in terms of how you recruit a police officer, in terms of the particular qualifications that that officer is required to have, and in particular 5 O-levels and so on. And the entire process in which an officer would have to do polygraph and psychometric tests and so on. Unlike the training is for 6 months. In terms of the Special Reserve Police Officer, the qualifications is able-bodied, and they train for 6 weeks, a little beyond 6 weeks, as well as they are mainly used, they are not permanent, so they have to be called up by the commissioner to perform their duties. And so we have full-time Special Reserve officers as well as part-time Special Reserve. But the TTPS police officer is a permanent police officer who is employed full-time.
Okay, I asked that question for a specific reason because I've heard repeatedly in the public domain and here today in relation to the number of police officers in the TTPS in terms of a totality and whether that is sufficient enough for what we need to do as a country in relation to the population that we have. And the number that was put forward was approximately 7,800. But as I continue to read in the report, it indicated that 35% of that number was SRPs. So now you're telling me that they are part-time SRPs and that they are full-time SRPs. So I did some simple math and I realized that about 2,400 of those officers of the 7,800 SRP individuals who may or may not be active or operating on a daily basis in that regard. And so the real number of officers on the ground would be somewhere around 4,000. So I'm asking the question, if one of the major problems that we really have in relation to the human resources put forward before is how we use the actual number of physical police officers that we have on the ground. So you have 4,000 available, that's on paper. I don't know how much is actually there on a daily basis to be used, and how are these police officers distributed throughout the entire country? How many are resident in Tobago? How many are resident in Trinidad? What parts of Trinidad are these officers resident? And can we integrate the use of technology to sort of better manage that? So is it that you have, of the 4,000, 1,000 in North Trinidad and only 500 in South Trinidad? And how can we better utilize technology, either GIS or some other digital format, that we can manage the use of those officers? And I guess the question I'm really asking is that 7,800, is it that we should stop saying that that is enough? Because it seems as though that's not, given the number of officers that we actually have present physically. And I haven't even spoken about the ones on vacation, and I haven't talked about the actual vacant positions in the TTPS. So what is the actual number, physical police officers, that we have to use for protection of the population of Trinidad and Tobago?
Mr. Phillip, could you start off?
The sanction strength of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is in around 7,800 police officers. And the actual strength, the sanction strength, is what they have actually been approved by Cabinet. The actual strength is about 6,800. The special reserve strength is a different strength, of which we have about either between, could be just under 3,000 of them.
Top of the 6,000, so it's 6 plus the 3?
Yes,
okay.
Yes. So at any one point in time, we would have certainly, we have officers on vacation leave, long vacation leave. At present, we probably have just over about 225. We have officers on sick leave. We have extended sick leave we're talking about. We have officers on suspension. That may come up to another, between sick leave and suspension. We may have just about 600 officers there. Because the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is decentralized, and we have 77 locations where we have police stations, although we man just over about 102 police buildings, that is police compounds. And because we are required to provide 24 hours of policing throughout Trinidad and Tobago, and given the fact that we have a 40-hour work week, we have to look at the available resources, and this is why you would, at any one point in time, probably find, let us say, between 2,000 on an average, because we run shifts. At least if we have an 8-hour shift and we need to have 3 search, we probably will have about 2,000, a little over 2,000, 2,500 spread across the country.
This is SRPs?
No, it isn't SRPs.
Just police officers?
It is, of course, mixed between SRPs and regulars.
You mentioned,
sorry,
just to mention in the report that about 45 to 50% of those officers indicated that they spend 4 to 6 hours doing paperwork or administrative work, but you didn't indicate whether that's daily or whether that's weekly, out of the 40-hour work week, or is that a daily thing?
I think it's weekly.
As weekly? Okay.
Mr. Harold, just to follow up from what you were saying.
I wanted to follow up on Mr. De Freitas' important issue about the SRPs. I'm sorry, I'll come back to it. The SRPs is a special case that affects the manpower status of the police service. More precisely, the training is very deficient, as Mr. Phillip pointed out, compared to the normal police officer, especially when both sides have to do similar tasks. More than that, you have SRPs inside the Homicide Bureau, Fraud Squad, in other critical agencies, carrying that deficiency in comparative capability. And for other reasons, governance issues, the SRPs are not under, in terms of citizen complaints, under the Police Complaints Authority. They should be, and we made that recommendation. More than that, Mr. Chairman, the SRPs are governed by the Statutory Services Authorities Commission. They are governed by the Local Government Ministry and one or two other agencies. We also recommend a tightening up and a proper centralization of such a governance model. More recently, we heard, because it concerns what our recommendation is about, that the Ministry of Local Government is hiring about 400 more SRPs. We strongly advised in the report that such additional SRPs be slowed down until the report is properly considered and the recommendations accommodate implementation or not. Because to continue with the current operations of the SRPs as they are, with the several deficiencies, having to do the same tasks that the TTPS is responsible for, that will confuse police performance in terms of measurement. People wouldn't want to know how much offenses the SRPs committed, how much deficiencies they were in performance. They will blame it all on the overall police service. That is one reason we strongly recommend a review, Mr. De Freitas, of the SRPs and their connection to the overall police service. That is a long-time tradition that must now be broken for police performance all-around improvement.
Just before we move forward, I want, from where I sit and on behalf of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, to actually say that the SRPs, in fact, contribute human service to assess the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and most of them, in fact, perform very excellent. So I just want to put that on record. We do have some issues like, even within the TTPS, but the SRPs do, in fact, serve us proudly and well.
Can the SRPs move from that area into a regular police officer? And does being an SRP assist in that transition in any way? Like, would they get, I guess, an advantage because they're an SRP? And then they want to become a regular police officer. And I guess I should ask, how many of the SRPs, say in the last 3 years, would have gone across to becoming a regular police officer? It seems like a natural transition. Why would anybody want to stay as an SRP, given the fact that you said it's part-time, some of them, and I guess some are full-time?
Well, there is no law that speaks about SRPs moving from SRPs to members of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. However, Cabinet, historically, in the past, made decisions to have absorptions, and in fact, some of those SRPs were in fact absorbed into the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Also, even while you serve as a member of the Special Reserve, and you acquire, while serving, you acquire the qualifications to join the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and you are within the age of 18 to 35, you could apply to be recruited into the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. And once you satisfy the recruitment process, you are, in fact, you join the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Quite recently, I think sometime late earlier this year, 40 such persons were in fact recruited in a batch into the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service from the Special Reserve.
Mr. Chairman, yes, through you. Mr. Deosran, in your opening remarks, you expressed concerns about the recruitment and training aspects of it. And one of the committee recommendations, you indicated that a significant reason for the inefficiency, ineffectiveness, and lack of professional integrity and commitment in the stems from deficiencies in the recruitment, training, and assessment systems. So I would like you to, for the benefit of the public, just give us a brief indication of the training program that currently exists, indicate if the program has evolved over the years, and if these changes, in your opinion, have had any impact on the quality of recruits entering the system.
Mr. Philip, you want to?
Well,
Doctor, you want to say something?
yes. Well, given the fact that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service Act, in fact, specifies the criteria that recruits should, in fact, pass through from the, what we say, 5 O-levels, and then there is a assessment, there's an examination, as well as you do polygraph, you do psychometric testing, there's an agility test, and so on. We have that aspect, and thereafter, having entered the academy, there are several core components of training that we, in fact, do. So we do traffic laws, we do criminal law, we even do behavior, some of the behavioral sciences now. So generally, this is the broad remit. After there are about 2 exams, and we must pass these exams. Thereafter, the recruits or the police trainees, they are no longer called recruits, the police trainees, having passed those exams, they now move to the next stage, they are sworn in, and then they move to the next stage, whereby they, in fact, do the firearm. Only after you are sworn in, then we put you through the firearm training. And after you pass the firearm training, certainly then we have the passing out parade, and basically you are passed out as a police. But you also do some drill, you know, as part of your, to discipline you, because quite a number of persons coming from, you know, the civilian life, in order to mold them into a quasi-military life, we do drill training and so on.
Well, I mean, what I really want to get at is what deficiencies do you see in that existing system? Because you did identify that the deficiencies in the recruitment and training has led to inefficiency and a lack of professional integrity. Now, have there been any changes in the core curriculum then at the police academy over the years that have resulted in changes in the behavior of the recruits when they become, after they're sworn in? So have you seen any transformations in the curriculum over the years that have had any negative impact on the effectiveness then of the police service?
Yeah, but, as I recall, we heard the views from the police service during our deliberations, as Mr. Philip has also enunciated. We also heard from previous ministers of national security, the DPP, who wants to look at the evidence, the charges, and so on. We look at previous commissioners of police and the other stakeholders. And we found out, for example, one deficiency was that the high failure rate in the examination process, 50% failure rate and so on. We also examined the level of commitment to the police service. We also examined the extent of corruption as disclosed by the police officers themselves. So there were several quantitative and qualitative deficiencies that we heard, and we therefore formed a judgment that there is need for both pre-service and a higher level of entry. And I come back to the SRPs, you see. I mean, you really need, for example, a different mode of governance. So those conclusions will come from the interviewers and those who have been strongly and closely aligned to the police service itself, and who give us the information and the evidence at that time, as I remember, to come to the conclusion we have come to, both in terms of SRPs and also in terms of the training module we propose.
Just before we go forward, I must add too that even at the recruitment stage, we do vetting, and we do what we actually hire officers, persons who have been retired, to do this vetting of the police trainees or the police applicants. And while we do that, sometimes we come up with some issues in and around vetting, because when we go within the community and we try to get information with respect to these applicants, sometimes we do not always get the fairest of answers, and that sometimes we get a little problem or issues in and around that. We also put the trainees or the applicants on the newspapers, all in an effort for the public to comment. Sometimes we do in fact get some comments, but generally we have enhanced the vetting process, all in an effort to ensure that the officers who are coming into the police service are of the quality and of the character that we expect. What Professor Diosaran spoke about, I gather, may very well be at the point where what we want to consider continuous training. After you would have been recruited, we need to ensure that there's the whole aspect of continuous training and continuous development for the police officer. So by and large, when the failure rate in terms of, let us say we have the promotion exams and so on, we could in fact see some measure of improvement in terms of the pass rate and so on. So we are working on that program, because we do have, since we have the academy and we have gotten a credit, moving forward to get recognition, we have in fact some very core courses. So we have introductory, intermediate, as well as advanced training programs at the academy, and all of that would help us to ensure that officers could be continuously trained.
If I may just continue a bit, I believe I also saw in the report a concern that you have more officers leaving the service than you are getting recruits annually. And I'm also hearing a sense that you wish to improve the academic qualifications for recruits coming in. Now, recognizing that in our society we are seeing greater levels of underperformance amongst males, are you currently then seeing a reduced number of males being accepted as recruits? And do you see that being a challenge going forward in being able to maintain the recruitment strength that you require to maintain the numbers then of officers that you require in the service?
Certainly, you have raised a very interesting point. And in terms of applicants, yes, we want to say, in terms of the number of females, we do see a high rate of interest in terms of female applicants. Yes, we continue to get male applicants. However, there's always the struggle, because there are a number of issues concerning the male applicants, and in particular in Tobago. However, we have an aggressive recruitment process whereby applicants could apply online. We have the whole aspect of walk-ins at police stations or at the academy. And all in all, we continue to see interest. And we go out and have fairs and so on, and we continue to see an interest in persons wanting to serve within the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service.
Chair, through you, I have two very short questions. Firstly, with respect to the assessment exam for entrance into the police service, how often is this exam revised? And my second question is that the police service conducts majority of prosecutions at the magistrate court level. Is there any specialized training or any training at all for officers who are acting as police prosecutors in these courts?
The academy, at every intake, every new intake, when there's a break, they do debriefing with respect to the previous training, the previous batch of officers that would have passed out, and in so doing, they try to ensure that they improve in terms of the program, whatever modules that they have, to ensure that they are as relevant as they need to be. And certainly with respect to police prosecutors, yes, we in fact have seminars, and we in fact have training for police prosecutors, and we do get assistance from the DPP's office, we do get assistance from the magistracy, and as well as we do get assistance from members of the private bar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Professor Deosaran, and to the rest of your team, let me say thank you. And I commend you for delivering such a comprehensive report with respect to the police manpower audit. Now, when I see the words manpower audit, it tells me of an HR function. And when I look at your findings and key issues, they tell me that there has been a complete breakdown of the HR function in the police service. Now, you spoke that you said that there were problems with leadership. Now, what I want to know is exactly what does that mean? Now, with respect to the whole question of HR, the whole topic and study of HR, you have what obtained back in the days where there was a personnel department, and that just dealt with administrative HR issues. Then there came the whole question of HR management, and it speaks to recruitment, succession, discipline, performance management, etc. And now, contemporary practice speaks to strategic HR, which is the HR management function, as well as a bit of forecasting. And I see that you have some problems with that because you can't fill your vacancies. Well, the police can't fill its vacancies in time. So I really want to focus on the root of the problem, which is the HR function. In your audit, at the police service, and I'm not sure if the HR function is at the police service or whether it's at national security, what have you found? What comprises the HR function? Is it a group of 10 people? A group of 20 people? What are their qualifications? Who do they report to? Do they have the sort of autonomy where they can make decisions, forecasting, make recommendations? So, okay, there will be X amount of attrition by the year 2020. So between the years 2018 to 2020, we need to embark on a recruitment exercise, etc. I mean, there are many things that we can ask here, but I really want to go to the root. What have you seen? What is the HR function? How does it exist in the police service?
There are two levels to the response. One is, which disturbed me a lot because it is linked to the availability and the recovery of the data to come to the judgment that you're making. And we find there were boxes of data, as the implementation team told us, here, there, and everywhere. A lot of the data was in hard copy, not computerized for you to proceed with the apparent analysis to answer what you're saying. But there's some of what you're saying Mr. Phillip would be closely associated with in terms of the administration of the human resource system in the service. So I'll ask Mr. Phillip to add anything else, and then I will come back and perhaps round up the answer to your satisfaction. Mr. Phillips?
Yes. In terms of our human resource management system, we do have an information technology system called elucidate. So in fact, we have inputted into the system all the members of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. as well as the civilian staff. However, there are the main HR responsibilities, while the commissioner is in fact responsible for the entire management of the police service. We have a director of HR who is a civilian member, and that officer is a public servant. And the HR officers, they are persons who come from the public service. So we have, I may not call the accurate terms, but we have HR Officer 1, HR Officer 2, and there are some other streams all up to the Director HR, who is the person in charge. And they are responsible for some of the main management functions in terms of the HR, be it performance appraisal, gathering that information, the sick leave management, and so on. We also have some police officers who are also engaged in performing some HR functions, and they also assist on a day-to-day basis. But by and large, because given the large number of officers and civilian staff and so on, there is some gaps in terms of efficiency. However, we are working towards improving the system, because just as you did mention about a strategic HR plan, we are in fact formulating a strategic HR plan which is to be in line with our operating plan and our strategic plan. So we are in fact working to improve the system, but we must admit that it is probably not the most efficient, but we are working to ensure it is efficient, because given the level of, when we look at the attrition rate, this is what we were mentioned was being made of. On an annual basis, we may have, let us say, about 200 officers retiring. And when we look at the recruitment rate, because of the limited capacity in terms of at the academy, where we have spaces for at least 200. Sometime before, we were very fortunate when we had in fact rented or obtained the services at the Shagaramas Convention Center. That was astronomical. We, in fact, were able to recruit as much as 500 to 600 officers. However, the lease ended and they took back, they wanted the Shagaramas Convention Center. So while we were trying to get other facilities to, in fact, see if we could increase our recruitment drive, we have been constrained financially. So
before you go on, who recruits? Who is responsible for the recruitment? Is it Police Service Commission or
no,
police?
The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is responsible for the recruitment.
Okay.
Trinidad and Tobago Police Service.
Yes. The Commissioner of Police?
Yes.
All right. So to Professor Deosaran, from the findings and key issues, it seems to me, and I've just been only able to glance it seems to me that perhaps 90% of all the problems that society sees with the police service can be found, the responsibility for it can be found in the HR function, or the failures of the HR function of the police service. And what recommendations do you have with respect to improving that HR function? Because these recommendations are, to me, a bit ad hoc. They treat with all the different parts of the HR function, but in terms of something more comprehensive.
You couldn't jump to the point which you and myself and the committee wanted to go.
Yeah.
Unless you have a more focused analysis of the problem, deeper than what we were able to put in terms of the manpower management, because we had a few months, but we highlighted that area of concern to attract a more deeper analysis, such as the one you are implying and what we also would have wanted to do. We didn't have the time because, you see, if you say 90%, you're on the right track, but we saw that as a foundation problem in that if your human resource system is not properly functioning or configured, your operational issues, your operational elements would be certainly deficient. And that is what is happening. Mr. Phillip is a loyal police officer, as you would observe in his explanation. He's, but at the same time, the other troubling issue in the 90% you spoke about is the extent of overtime, the abuse of leave, vacation, and other things that are documented in the report. So on both sides, you have this deficiency in manpower by excessive overtime, the abuse of leave, suspension, officers on suspension for 7, 8, 9 years, with sometimes with pay. And on the other hand, you have a very deficient human resource platform. Those are two very key issues. We must not forget the purpose of the committee. It is to be fair to the police service, but not to go overboard to defend the police service unnecessarily. We have reached a stage where denial and procrastination should be out of the agenda now. I say so on behalf of the public and those officials and prominent citizens and businessmen, including police officers themselves, who have given testimony before us. In page 13 or up to 14 and 15, you would see the diagrams which really illustrate the extent of dissatisfaction with the police service. And this is not something that we have developed on our own. We owe an obligation to the stakeholders and all the evidence we have collected to represent this in the report. So troubled by this now, we want to move to improve the police service beyond excuses and denials and so on. If we don't do that now, and we try to stick in a zone of comfort as things are now by looking at this little thing here and this little thing there, we have to transcend those things now and respond to the public concern, which is documented here, and which every day has been documented in one form or another. So in that context, we have come with these recommendations about examining more closely the human resource issue, which I'm quite sure you're right. We are right too, but we couldn't go more deeply except to signal to the authorities this is a key area that needs immediate and urgent attention in the light of what you have said. And another part of the report is the concerns about police not responding to citizen complaints. Then we have the vacation leave issue, which some people, senior officers, have hundreds of days vacation leave. That is in the report. So those areas of concern, but the more troubling demand we have to face now, as people representing the public, especially parliamentarians, is how to improve public confidence in the police service. If that confidence is not improved, as low as it is now, disturbingly so, you will not get evidence for your court cases, you will not get an effective community policing program, and so on. So that is our overarching issues that we need immediate attention to, and include what we have here. The very negative views and opinions about the police service must be attended to, because all that has been said so far, including the SRPs and the human resource and so on, those things are not reflected in public confidence of the police. So the police now have to develop a strategy to improve their performance, and more precisely, to deal with this low confidence in themselves, which is a serious defect in overall police performance.
Yeah, Professor Dersaran, I agree with you. I agree with you fully. But I'll just put again to you all that I am seeing that a lot of the confidence issues that the public has in the police service can be traced all the way to the failure of the HR function and the failure of the police service to properly manage the HR function.
I agree with you, yeah, because that would impact on output. You're right. You're quite right, Mr. Mitchell. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon again. So I've been listening to all of the comments thus far, and you've put forward out of the report key recommendations, and I just realized something. In relation to the finances, we know that with every budget that is passed over the years, national security is either number 1 or number 2 in relation to the allocation. But I did not see coming out in the report, it could be there, I could be wrong, usage of that money in relation to the TTPS and its management. And that's mainly because we're hearing now that the human resource management system and the portal needs to be utilized. We're hearing that we need to add IT into the TTPS in terms of how it's being used, something as simple as having a portable device so that when you're giving a tickets on the road, you don't have to go back to the office to then write out a ticket or put it in a book because it would already be there. In terms of use of IT in that regard, therefore reducing the number of hours that a police officer has to do administrative work, and a whole host and myriad of other things. So I guess the real question is, did you look into any of the finances in relation to the TTPS, given that a lot of the budget goes into the TTPS, and your report is basically saying that a lot of it isn't working? So where is that money going?
Every government, every prime minister in recent times especially, has complained about not getting value for money, as it is said, from the police service because of the relatively large amounts of money allocated in every budget to the police service. Now, allocation of money and the acquisition of that money are often two related but not coincidental things. Sometimes the money is allocated, as we have heard, even from Mr. Phillip himself, is not acquired at the moment needed. I believe, however, we should have gone, if we had more time, into the specifics, comparing expenditure item by item, and the output that should be commensurate with that expenditure. We haven't had the time to do that, and that is an exercise that perhaps should and could be done. But in terms of the financial aspects of the police service, in terms of the budget, expenditure, and accountability, I would once again invite DCP, Mr. Phillip, to add to what I have said. Mr. Phillip?
The only thing I would want to add is that, like any other government department, on an annual basis, we do have the Auditor General, who would come as an external agency to audit the police department. And when we look at the reports, there are, in terms of the irregularities, there are not many highlighted. We do address it. So in terms, but what I'm saying in terms of value for money, certainly the monies that are in fact made available to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service through the Ministry of Finance, we try to ensure through the Commissioner that that money is spent on, in fact, on those items or in terms of those specific initiatives that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service put out in its operating plan.
You see, let me just round off that to get to the importance of the question. We are, yes, concerned with money allocated, money spent, but I think what Mr. De Freitas is implying, rightfully so, is what is the qualitative output of that expenditure? Detection rate, citizens' response, and matters of performance of that kind. So what we have to do as a special component of the report is to examine that issue in terms of, under the rubric, for example, value for money, in terms of the specifics of police performance commensurate with the expenditure allocated therein.
Yes, I would just recognize Mr. Mitchell again for a quick question before I move over to Mr. Leland, who's next.
Yeah. A question to Mr. Phillip. I see that you found, as a finding and key issue, area of concern, some operational waste, I would call it, as it pertains to police manpower time. So I want to give you the opportunity to explain, because I feel sorry for those police officers who have to, take a lot of time to chase down a man to serve him a summons, or even the police officers who they have to visit the scene of a small accident, and they have to fill out these long forms and give these long statements, etc. So I want to know if you have recommended, perhaps to the government, Ministry of the Attorney General, to the Ministry of National Security, that the laws be changed. For example, a road traffic authority, as obtains in other countries, that they can deal with those matters, so that the police service can concentrate on protecting and serving members of the public as it pertains to crime. Have you made any of these recommendations for these types of changes?
To the best of my knowledge, I do not think that we have made written recommendations, but in fact, when we meet in various committees and in various meetings, we do in fact voice our opinion in terms of, because we do have a meeting in terms with the Ministry of Works, a standing committee there, and until sometimes even at the level of the magistracy, where we have persons who are required to attend court for tickets and always for postponement and so on. We do try to ensure that we get some kind of arrangement so that we attend court when matters are in fact listed for trial. But all in all, we do spend a lot of time running between doing some of these work. In terms of the accidents, quite a significant number of the accidents are in fact trivial accidents, and as you mentioned, we do have to fill out a lot of paper, and still a lot of paper based, even though we enter the accidents on our Versadex system. However, because the law requires that we have to do that, we generally, even though we recommend no further police action and the insurance still have to deal with it, we record it, and persons involved in the accidents, they do apply for a report of the findings of the accidents to take back to the insurance, but it is quite our task, and we have the view that certainly those trivial accidents should come within the remit, just as you say, of the insurance industry, whereby we do very minimum recording, and the insurance industry basically pursue all the investigations and settle claims.
Very happily, I might say, in another arm of the state, policy and the law is being applied as we speak to transfer this entire ticketing regime, which typically went into the criminal justice system in the magistrates court. They are being treated now administratively based on new arrangements, and the outcome that Mr. Mitchell and you alluded to is forthcoming. That would take about 120,000 cases and police officers dealing with them out of the court system into an administrative system with the point system and the merit system and that sort of thing. So yes, we are very happily heading in that direction, making the general point that we have to apply new technologies and best practices to make the whole thing more efficient. Mr. Lehunt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, I just want to feed off a question that was MP Oliveira was making and go back a little bit to the recruitment system. And I have another question that I want to follow up with. I start with the position that people who enter the police service, they are normal people, and then you enter the system, and then while you are in there, it appears that a number of things happen that results in what is coming out of the report. So again, I want to go back and make sure that we are getting the right people to come into the service. And again, a simple question: to what extent, if I ask the commissioner or to anyone, do we feel confident that the process that we have, the level of questioning, the level of psychometric testing, whatever, that the process that we have for recruiting and selecting people to come into the police service and the training that they get, if I have to ask, if you have to rank that process, let's say with other Caribbean countries or Western Hemisphere countries, just as a broad subset, to what do you think we are up to standard? We are meeting proper standards in that regard. If you have to give, what is your view, and how do you think we rank with regard to compared to other people from that whole recruitment process? And I mean the whole gamut of recruitment, psychometric testing, selecting, training, that program that you have inside there. So that's one question.
Zabir, you want to? Let me take it, because you, in your earlier question, you mentioned a comparative analysis with other countries. Let me start from there. Because you imply best practice, in fact, you said so.
Yes.
Best practice would mean what operates very well in other jurisdictions.
Might not operate here.
Yeah. So there are two methods that we use to come to the recommendation that we have come to. One is that the stakeholders' views, those who have been inside the police service, at the head, the commissioners themselves, I wouldn't call their names now, their names are all listed, about 3 or 4 commissioners, former national security ministers, the DPP and so on, and they have been seeing the police behavior for a number of years in terms of delivery, in terms of giving evidence and so on. So we use that as a basis. The other basis is what happens elsewhere. Now, I have visited several police stations abroad, Miami Police Station in particular, and it's all pre-service training now. That is best practice now across the world. The Caribbean will have to catch up now with what's happening around the world. And this is not a criticism. We have inherited a system from England with which we are still stuck 55 years after independence. That's why I made the point earlier on that we have to be creative now in the things we do and match our policies with what the society demands now. The society demands from the evidence that we have gathered that we lift the training level into pre-service training at a higher level and also apart from in-service training. Because once you're inside the police service, having been trained inside, it's a little difficult to get you out for discipline. There are a lot of procedures. The bureaucracy for discipline and so on is very complicated. We feel from the evidence that we have gathered and on a comparative basis with other countries, where the resignations and the people leaving the service after being recruited are very minimal because of the pre-service training they get and the inbuilt loyalty they accumulate afterwards, having made a career decision. So we also looked at the examination results. We look at several other information coming from the police themselves when we ask them about the recruitment system. So there's a level of dissatisfaction there that we thought put together with everything would necessitate the pre-service training system. So we believe that is the better way to go now. And perhaps by that way, let's lose sight of the fact that we belong to a CARICOM family. Whatever we do here, and if we do it very well, we can show others the way. We think this is the way to go now. And given the trouble from Jamaica to St. Vincent, the rising crime rate in Antigua with murders and so on, we have an opportunity here as a police service, as a committee, and as a parliament to do something new with best practice and something that will help inspire the other Caribbean countries to improve themselves. So with great respect, I present those views to you, Mr. Leon.
All right, okay, all right. After I take on board. Go ahead.
Yes, sir, good afternoon. I'd like to speak to this specifics that Professor spoke of. Last week, I did a lot of touring in the United States in terms of the recruitment processes for some schools of, one of the schools is the School of Justice, a School of Justice, where they have an extensive program on policing. And it's a similar case where you have a pre-recruitment program. You have high school students, some after high school, who are going to be a sort of pre-registration program where they take part in some academics and they get just a basic in crime scene technology. So it's sort of building a career path in the police service, where you see the police service not as a second option, but as a first option. You look at the Trinidad and Tobago Cadet Force, where you find a lot of the officers come out of the cadet force and go into the officer corps. And then they use that as a stepping stone. It's a career. And therefore, I think in this case, I think the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service has to be revamped, that it is seen as a career path rather than a second option. Like I have 5 O-levels, I don't want to go into the civil service, or maybe I'll try the police service. So I think, and with that sense, you build individuals who are dedicated. I'm not saying that you're going to find that it's going to be a perfect system, but the likelihood that you would find people going into the police service, being a constable, and getting themselves involved in things that they ought not to get involved in, but they would find themselves in a situation that I can see myself as a sergeant. I can see myself as, I can look to Mr. Phillip or the other higher level of, officers in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service as an example. Because one of you have to look at the police service as a microcosm of a macrocosm of society itself. Because the individuals that we recruit from society, we recruit for the police service, they come out of the society, regardless of where they come from, whether it's a low-income background or a high-income background, but they are coming out of society. And we have to look to our schools to develop a cadre of individuals who will be citizens, productive citizens. If we, looking at this whole issue, I'm coming from Tobago, it's a small society, and what I'm seeing that's occurring in Tobago, what is happening in our schools, the police service not only going into the schools and speaking to the students, but this police service, this society, has to be seen as a stepping stone, and every profession has to be looked at as a career path, whether it's a carpentry, but it's a career and not an option. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. As a follow-up question, and I want to be a little bit, I said I don't want to be too controversial, but I will be a little bit controversial and ask. Now, when you look at some of the problems in the report, and you recognize that there is a human resource management system, there is one, it's not being used, there actually are appraisal forms, they are not being done, so it's not like they are not there. So the things are there, but they're either not being used. They talked about decentralizing of the human resource system. It was recommended a long time ago. It wasn't really done. Is the heart of the problem, or part of the main problem, really inside there is one of just a lack of discipline by members who should be exercising discipline, or is it leadership? Because it appears to me that the things are there. People are just not doing it. And we could fix and put back the things there. So as you said, there is a human resource management system. Is it being optimized? Why are people not doing it? What really is the heart of the problem there? And I put forward, is it discipline? Is it leadership is the problem?
While the committee churns on that very controversial one, let me entertain a quick one. You'll get back to that from Senator.
Well, I'm glad.
That's a big one.
Thank you, Chair, through you, because it's related to what Member LeHunt indicated. And it's a really 3-part, but they're all related, and I guarantee you that it'll be short. And I don't want to belabor the point, because we've all recognized that there's a significant HR management issue in the TG Police Service. And my first issue is going back to the issue of training and recruitment, and the dichotomy to me seemingly between, and I hope I'm not sounding like an inquiry because I know my tone can be sometimes mercenary. That's not my intention. But the comments from Professor Diosaran about Special Reserve Police officers, and I believe they train for 6 weeks. Is that correct? Compared to 6 months from regular police? And very often asked to do very similar tasks. Add that to a 50% failure rate. And in...
I'm sorry, 50% failure rate where? I heard the figure and I want to understand.
Is this in training? At the training level? Exam level.
Exams generally promotion
Right.
exams.
Right. Which suggests some kind of which suggests some kind of shortcoming either of continuous training, or initial instruction itself. And how can we expect there not to be some sort of impact when you think of approximately, and I'm not the best math brain, a little under one third SRP use combined with regular police use. When you have that significant cadre of persons who are trained significantly less, doing the same tasks, and being appraised overall in terms of police performance generally, because the public is not disaggregating SRP versus police. 1. 2, to follow from Member LeHunt's comments or question, what is the reason that the human resource portal that was developed and customized to suit specifically the human resource needs of the TTPS, why has it not been integrated? Relatedly, and it's a complex question, I can't help it. 3, Mr. Philip indicated that the HR function is really civilian professionals. Is that correct? Primarily civilian professionals, right? Part of the report indicates there is an integration problem between civilian professionals and regular police, to me, which is obviously one of the implementation challenges, because I know in a different incarnation, there have been cooperation and collaboration issues coming from that integration issue. Because if you have civilian professionals in HR trying to get regular police to cooperate, there's a challenge. And finally, it speaks also to the application of basic technology to make it more efficient, inclusive of the same HR resource portal we spoke about, but on a basic functional level in terms of efficiency. Digital data input of reports and not books. Integration of services in the police service. So if a report is taken in a police station, it is networked throughout the police service generally. The application of GIS, GPS to manage manpower at any particular area, and several other different levels of technology application that will deal with these efficiencies, or many of these efficiencies that we've outlined today. Sorry for the complex question, but we could start with the SRP, regular police dichotomy, because I commend Mr. Phillip for not throwing the SRPs under the bus and commending them. But let's be real here. We really cannot expect the same level of performance when someone is trained for 6 weeks as opposed to 6 months. And even the ones who are trained for 6 months have challenges moving on. It speaks to an issue of intake, curriculum, or instruction at the very training level.
Well, I'll try and deal with your package with the greatest respect and ability, and the other members, I'll ask Dr. Mohammed to pick up in terms of the training, and Dr. Guy Obiako has already said her piece, and she will certainly want to add something. And after that, Mr. Miguel has something to say about the relationship between the Police Complaints Authority and the police service in terms of discipline and public complaints and so on.
And it also speaks to public confidence, because if you want to attract persons to the service, it has to be an attractive service.
Mr. LeHunt raised, I think, a relevant point with respect to career development. And he introduced an issue of, is it discipline?
Well, yes.
That was the overall
Yes, I
Yeah.
spoke to the point that the
Is it a
fact
lack
that
of
the things were
discipline?
there to be done, but
All
they
right.
are not being done. Is
All right.
discipline the real overarching problem? Or
Yes.
leadership?
Yes, sir, all right. Well, in answer to that, I would say the discipline that is lacking is attributable to a lack of appropriate training and professionalization. If you become a professional, as we are implying with pre-service training, you would have inculcated in your duties, timelines, delivery qualities, and also accountability in the system. That would make the police service a higher level of professionalism. Because we are not speaking only about pre-service training as an isolated step. We are speaking about pre-service training with a lot of upstream professionalization, like discipline, accountability. No accountability in the police services, and I will stop there. It's implied in the report. It is, you know, so we link discipline with the pre-service training. And I take the point, yes, a lack of discipline, but we can remedy that, if not totally, at least largely so, by making the police service a higher level of professionalism by the pre-service training. Now, Mr. Paul Richards, Senator Richards, spoke again about the SRPs, and I agree with you. I stated that earlier on. And I said, we are not here to make excuse. I know Mr. Phillips feels that the SRPs are doing the yeoman service. All officers feel they're doing the yeoman service. But we are dealing with two related issues, the quality of the service and the high level of public dissatisfaction. We have to remedy that as public officials, especially elected officials who are accountable to the people. I say so with great respect, of course. But that is the challenge facing us now. And if you have people trained differently from another group that is trained at a higher level at different elements in the track, you can't expect them to perform similarly. And I don't know why this thing has been left so for so long. Then you have another confusing condition where you have jurisdiction over the same SRPs, this for 3 or 4 different levels. And we are saying, and we told the government through the report, don't rush into bringing in more SRPs until you remedy some of the things you are pointing out. This is not an issue of showmanship or public relations or piling numbers upon numbers. We have the consensus from all the groups, Mr. Chairman, that the issue is not more police officers, but the effective and efficient use of your current manpower. That implies check your vacation leave, check the abuse of overtime, check the abuse of taking leave of all kinds. Some people don't leave for years. No, that will distort your manpower figure of 7,000 and something, and the one on board of is 6,000 and something. So it is the effective use of manpower, the existing manpower, and not necessarily rushing, as would appear, to put more numbers on the table. And that is what this report is about, improving the quality of service, accountability, and responding to public concerns, Mr. Chairman. Well, one last point, we have to be inspired by best practice, as Mr. Leon said. There's a report now on the Manchester Terrorist Act in England, a report now in Parliament being debated. And one of the criticisms is that the security service lapsed, and that complaint was in the report. But what I admire is the dignity and the grace with which the report is treated in Parliament to come to a proper conclusion. The security services admitted their errors and promised to improve. And that is the system we have to work on. We have to improve ourselves as well as improve the system. And all the personnel in the police service should adopt that. If there were pre-service training, there will be an oath of office and so on, which would help remedy the commitment and the professionalism that we expect from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Mr. Mohammed.
Good afternoon, members. Just a couple of quick ones on the question of Senator Richards on the technology issues and stuff like that. We've found that the technology absorption rates into the TTPS was dramatically low, so much so that basic automation issues which could bring a lot of increase in productivity issues. Chairman alluded to basic things like checking a sick leave or leave balances and stuff were long drawn out and very much paper-based in that situation. On the question of training and curriculum issues, we're looking at a total kind of reform of the existing curriculum that now reflects the new nature of crime and the new nature of the space that people and society is now operating in. From issues surrounding trauma, gender issues, behavioral issues, stuff like that, and the new kinds of crime and the curriculum that is commensurate with that kind of new kind of society that we're now faced in. As such, the report alludes to, as the chairman outlined, a pre-service which deals with that kind of issue, but not just for the TTPS, because the committee is also concerned about the national public safety issues and the other players that are involved in public safety, private security companies, and all the others that play a role. And therefore, a pre-service possibly lodged with a TLI, a tertiary level institution, with specific site training done by the agencies themselves. But we feel that a pre-service could raise a cadre of nationals that is not only available to TTPS, but all other public safety providers in that kind of way, and lift the bar in such a way that there is now choices to be made by recruiters of the industry. In other words, you don't take what you recruit, you take the best from a lot that is a lot bigger of the applicant pool. And in that way, we feel that we could add some value to the caliber, the competence levels of the people that we're putting out there and trusting public safety in.
Is largely about, as you call it, in this regard, pre-service. And that is an attempt to bring into the police service a more professional, a more willing, a more ready person for policing. Now, if I apply that model to what exists, because you did mention teaching service, my understanding is that an individual applies to join the teaching service through the Teaching Service Commission. They are processed, appointed, and they are placed in a school, and sometime later, if I'm wrong, somebody stop me, they would be sent to the Teachers Training College. So it means they're into the teaching service, but not yet professionally trained. I want to understand, since you mentioned teaching service, are you saying, because as it now stands, hope I'm not confusing the issue, an individual applies to join the police service, there's an advertisement, as Mr. Phillip explained, and he or she is processed, put through a lot of stuff, and then they enter into the police training college, akin to the teachers training college. They enter, and they are taught certain things, there are exams and so on, then they go into the firearms component until they're ready to pass out as full-fledged police officers. Am I correct, Mr. Phillip?
Yes, certainly.
Largely correct. So I want to get clearer when you say pre-service, because I'm getting the impression from your submission of as the pre-service that you're talking about an individual who's at college, as happens in the United States, we heard, and he or she decides, I want a policing career. So that person goes into a tertiary level institution that teaches aspects of policing. They get their qualification without having even approached the regular police service or the police service for entry. They do their thing independently in an academic pursuit. And having had this qualification, they now approach the police training, police organization for entry, or is it, because I see police academies across the United States. I don't get the sense that there are people coming out of colleges and who, you know, I want to understand what exactly are we talking about.
These are young people. The people I'm speaking about they're between probably the ages of 17 and 19.
Right.
And these are before they enter college.
So this is offered in the normal academic institutions?
It's also offered in the normal academic institutions, but also there are individuals who are pre-qualified for the police service. They do the physical training, and then they just get a bit of, like an introduction to the police service.
So an individual who thinks that he or she wants to become a police officer can go to this institution, which has nothing to do with, well, when I say nothing, but that is not aligned to or attached to the police organization. They get this training, and then they approach with this training for entry into the organization. That's what you're talking about?
Yes, there's this particular college, that particular, for example, the Miami-Dade.
Yes.
They have a you just go directly into the police academy.
Right.
They have a let's say pre-qualification before you go into the police service.
Yes. I understand what you are saying.
Miami-Dade is licensed to perform that duty for the police service in Florida, in fact.
So in which case...
You've got to pass through the component in Miami-Dade College that does that training.
In which case you are proposing that UTT or some institution here design programs of that nature. So persons will go there and get this license, this training and certification, and then they approach the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service with it.
Our model includes, we wouldn't leave the police service isolated. Part of the induction and the practical exercises could be carried out by the police service itself as well, as a conjoint to the training that they would receive at whichever institution in terms of the...
But then that leaves the police service in a very strange place, because it means persons now, I mean, they are not conducting, in that scenario, they are not conducting a recruiting exercise, because right now the police service carries out recruiting exercises to attract persons to its fold. If you do it along the lines that I'm trying to understand you as recommending, it means that the police service organization will have to sit there and wait for persons who happen to be interested on their own volition and then approach them. Right now, the police service carries out recruiting drives. They use various techniques to get young people attracted, the horses, and all of that, various programs. And then one day they put out an advertisement. They say, we were seeking persons to join the police service. These are the criteria. Come down to the police training college or police station on a certain date, bring along these documents, and they start a recruiting process, because that organization, having a life of its own, want to keep persons coming in. How do you, before I allow Mr. Lehat to come back, how do you treat with that issue?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yeah.
In reality, the expectation is that such an institution will be a direct feeder into the police service. So you have the police youth clubs in there, all over the country. They will be attracted to a career in law enforcement, and the police are going to be the beneficiaries. In fact, they are going to gather up all these people in there who are pre-trained, pre-qualified, to inculcate them into the police service. And for those who perhaps choose to deviate onto a path also in law enforcement, we have the security companies and so on that can take those that don't graduate to the police service. But it's a whole sort of police cadet institution really feeding into the police service as a pre-qualification.
Yeah, but just following up on that then, but so is that going to be the only, in those areas, and I know the programs that you are speaking about, because as you said, there are certain schools, there's schools of justice, even high schools, that kids go to, and they go to these programs from high school, because that's where they're leaning, and as you said, after they finish that program, they then apply to the airport authority to work in that particular area. They are the custom officers, they are the prisons officers. But in each one of those areas, when you have an inkling, and they teach you broad professionalism, and I hear what you're saying. But each one of those areas also have their own academy. So after you finish do that program, then you have to go into your own academy. So it is a feeding ground for the, so am I understanding that you are still holding out that they will still be the police academy, who will then have their specific programs to augment what is done from before?
Certainly, the police academy, they will be creating the police officers themselves, while the tertiary education system will pre-qualify them, give them the qualification to enter into the police service. But once they enter, then all the beat and patrol, the criminal law, and specific policing requirements will be taught to the...
In your recommendation, are you saying the only entry level to get into the police service should be through this mechanism, or you should still have the police having the ability to take individuals who did not, or who have other training? So what happens if I decide afterwards, I didn't go that route, I went to university, and I decide I would like to go to the police academy? Could I get entry into there through an alternative route?
That youth stream. And the next question is, would it be enough to meet the expectations of the police organization? That it will be enough. That stream, would it be enough? Because I came to the Trinidad and Tobago Cadet Force, and I wanted to become a soldier, if I might just share this with you. And by the time the Army was picking, I was 17, couldn't go there. In January, I turned 18 in December, and on the 8th of January, the police was picking, and my mother said, you better go down in that barracks. So I went down in the barracks, and I ended up in the police service. So the vagaries of coming through the cadet force with the Army didn't get me. And if the Army waits for people who really want to be soldiers coming through the cadet force, there are many schools. I'm just concerned, just to append to Mr. Leon's question, whether the stream will be enough.
Chair, just by analogy, when the country, Trinidad and Tobago, started its borrowing from the teaching service side of it, all teachers, as you rightly put, were into school and then went to training college. Because we've gone strategic on that, and because we've opened up this pre-service for education and educators, the in-service training is no longer applicable. All teachers now are pre-serviced, which means the cadre and the turnover has gotten strategically, from a strategic standpoint, has gotten so far into producing the cadre of nationals that recruiters can be selective.
When you say they're pre-service, what exactly do you mean?
That you do a Bachelor of Ed, if I may use that example, and then apply to teach, as opposed to being placed in a primary school and then be placed for every Friday or so in a training college.
So there's hardly any...
That's correct.
There's no teachers training college?
That is correct. And in the same analogy, from a strategic standpoint, given a couple of turnouts, sooner or later you're going to have an oversupply, which is a recruiter's playing field, so that you could actually be very selective of your best candidates.
So if you want to become a teacher now,
yes,
you go to some tertiary institution
do
and get a B.Ed.
That's correct. And then apply.
And then you apply a bachelor's in education or something like that. And then you apply to get in there.
That's correct.
And in those training programs, all the things that you will need to be an efficient teacher would have been taught to you.
That is correct.
Maybe a 3-year program.
That is correct.
Right. So let's now apply that to the police service. You're saying that I want to be a police officer. There's some institution somewhere, not the police academy,
right,
where I should go,
yes,
and I'll get some basic elements on policing. That qualification after 3 years or whatever should allow me, it's the entry requirement for policing. And I now enter the police service.
But you apply.
I apply. Right. I'm accepted. Right. And now they put me in an academy again, or I'm ready for the road, like the teacher.
Sorry, but the program is now very different in the sense that you learn site-specific issues relevant to the
Fair
TTPS.
enough. Professional training like you
Correct.
would in.
Correct.
But of course, the teacher doesn't have that anymore.
No, he
From
does.
what you just said.
He does, go to schools as part of his curriculum training.
No, he comes in with his B.Ed.
Yeah.
But there's no teachers college anymore.
Right.
So once he enters the teaching service with this qualification, he doesn't get any further training to be a teacher on your model.
No, but
I'm asking,
there is continuous training on the teacher's part.
Correct.
But not necessarily required by the institution.
Okay.
But Chairman, I want to make one addition, please, if you will allow me. In the Miami-Dade, Florida case to which Dr. Guy Obiako alluded, the examinations are standardized across the state. That is, Miami-Dade College, which is the primary institution for this kind of pre-service training, has to follow the state regulations in both courses and licensing. So there is a standardization across the training. In other words, Miami-Dade cannot get up and do its own courses and generate its own curriculum. It has to follow the state licensing authority. They are just agents to execute that standardized
If I can just add one element to this, and it's going to be a fly in the ointment. I understand the principle on which you're making your suggestions or your recommendations, but there's a component of this. We're comparing this to Miami-Dade and other jurisdictions that have this. But those jurisdictions, and I say this with the greatest of respect to the men and women of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, who have also contributed to this manpower audit report, that they do not feel good about the police service. The public does not feel good about the police service. And we're asking the public now, young people, to train themselves more, to join the service that they don't have confidence in. What is going to change in the police service in terms of its operation, in terms of its public image, to make me as a young person want to go through all of this to be a part of that? Because in the US and in those jurisdictions, and Canada and the UK, those services have been transformed or evolved to become one of the more lucrative, filled with pride sectors for employment. And that is not necessarily a pervasive feeling about the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. So to me, something else has to happen in concert with that to make being a police officer an attractive endeavor for a young person. I don't know, you all look at me
But
kind of...
I thought we had agreed with you a few minutes ago. Other things have to be done upstream. Sorry, Mr. Mitchell.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on Senator Richards' comment, because I totally agree with the idea of pre-service training. And I think that COSTAT, they provide a criminal justice associate degree type of program. And I would hope that, the police service treats those applicants with some sort of priority. I agree that in an ideal sense, it would slow the rate of turnover. But I have to come back to the HR function, because where you have persons who have chosen that career path and they've gotten into the police service, where those persons, as police officers have complained to me, have to work 24 hours straight or 36 hours straight, they're not going to want to stay. And you've spoken about the new UTT, they do a bachelor's of education. We also have one of the best pre-service training institutions with respect to nurses. Correct. But what happens is that because of the poor HR practices, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and the United States, they poach all our best talent. Correct. Because of the poor HR practices. And going back to the point of the policeman who has worked 24 hours straight, 36 hours straight, because of poor scheduling, that policeman is not going to be the most polite. He's not going to be the most patient. And the poor HR practices impact directly on the citizen. So while the pre-service training is an excellent idea, we have to look at the HR function as a whole. We have to look at the proper promotional policies. Because if someone comes in, they've chosen this as a career path, but there's favoritism or victimization, not enough examinations, etc., they are going to want to leave. And you know who is going to benefit from all this? Because I'm sure persons benefit from GATE to go to COSTAT and get their criminal justice associate degree. They are going to leave and they're going to work with the private security services.
Let me put this, Mr. Philip, in light of what you've said. And as we keep an eye on the clock, we had intended to bring this session to an end at 5:30, but the thing has become so meaty, notwithstanding my vegetarianism. Looks as though we're heading for 7, but no, I can assure you we wouldn't. Let me put this to Mr. Philip. The question of nursing has just arisen. As it stands today, I understand, and if I'm wrong, I stand subject to your correction, anyone. The Nursing Council is responsible for recruiting and training nurses for the public health system here. So you make an application, the Nursing Council does the training, I think, they issue the certification, and then you are ready to enter the nursing service here. In addition to that, COSTAT does some nursing training in that institution. So you could go into COSTAT and you can get a certain kind of certification, and you are also, once licensed and approved by the Nursing Council under law, you then enter into the nursing service. That's it from the nursing perspective, subject to correction. In terms of the police service, will such an individual, you see, this is a question. Is that individual ready to start working as a Trinidad and a police officer? I mean, we can do a training program outside, you know, but I'm not altogether settled on this question. I don't fully understand. Mr. Philip, what are your thoughts about this pre-service as you understand it, as it applies to, I'm not asking you to give a personal view or your view as acting commissioner. As a member of the committee, I'm asking. What then, how does that fit into the requirements for police officers here today?
What I think we are getting at is simply that before a person, even though one has 5 O-levels and so on, before a person is recruited into the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, there should be some assessment of that person in terms of some kind of arrangement, even if it's, that person would have done some certificate or diploma course in criminology or whatever, or even by some arrangement with the police in terms of, just as how the fire services have these persons who are 16 years, I forget what they call them, auxiliaries, you know, you work alongside, you come and work alongside the police, and you get some minimum training, and you understand what policing is about, and people, you know, we have, you are mentored and all of these things, and at the end of that, you want to apply. Yes, somebody would recommend you, and so on. So, in either way, and it is very helpful, especially today, because one of the concerns I did mention is that, you know, a person at 18 years today in Trinidad and Tobago, given all what takes place in Trinidad and Tobago, are we certain that a person at 18 years is mature enough to deal with the stress and strains of what the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is? What we have to be very fortunate with in Trinidad today, people would complain, I hear, is the police service attractive? Well, I want to put on record that the police service remains one of the most attractive jobs in Trinidad and Tobago. Quite recently, we had a fair up at the Savannah where persons with degrees came to that fair for employment within the police service, and 9,000 of them turned up to that fair. 9,000 of them. So in the same Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, what you have is that some of the applicants, because at our level we have the psychometric as well as the polygraph test. When persons fail that, they go in the defense force and they go in the same prison system and the fire service because they don't have that. So they find their way there. So from where we stand in terms of recruitment, what I'm saying is that when we look at international best practices, they say that, from where I sit, they say that for persons to be considered members of the police service at point of recruitment, they should have the character and the traits, as well as, obviously, they must be service-oriented in terms of the integrity. They should be people-oriented. And all these, they must be able to have self-control. So you could find out about some of these traits when they work along in a program, as we say, the auxiliary fire. So all of these things, if we have these kinds of programs, you could monitor people and eventually persons, we could recruit such persons, into the But I feel that from where we sit, any pre-service arrangement could only endure to the benefit of the organization once there is a particular management structure, to the program, because it helps.
I just want to add, as I've been listening to everyone in terms of the pre-service and everything, and I've been trying to work out logistically what is the best case scenario to get the best quality officer after a certain period of time, as opposed to just a quantity of officers and you pick from that. And I'm thinking if you start at the police youth clubs at a particular age, and from that you get those that want to go forward, they go to that pre-service training, be it a tertiary institution, and they learn the academics of policing at that point. And then they move from there into the academy, where they will get their first taste of practical training in relation to the academics that they would have learned. And then they move into becoming an SRP, which is sort of a filter at that point. So you would have done the technical training at the police academy, which is still not the full thing. The SRP gives you that experience now. For a number of years, it could be set. And then from the SRP, you go into the police service. So it's a gradual step up. It gives the police service, 4 or 5 filters at that point to weed out individuals. So you might end up at SRP when they decide this is not for you. But what we would know is that when you get into the police service, you would have gone through, let's say, 5 or 6 years of robust training so that it's a quality officer coming into the TTPS at that point. The other point I wanted to make is that given everything that has been happening right now in relation to the TTPS, I'm wondering how effective is the chain of command, given that the morale is low, given that you have an HR issue going on, given that the technology is not being adapted. Because remember, at the end of the day, it's a commissioner of police that has to manage the TTPS in that regard. And if morale is low and there are officers in there that are just sort of, they're done, they're just there for a paycheck, how does that affect chain of command? This is not as unitized as the military, as was indicated to me before, in terms of you give an order and they follow the order. I know the TTPS is slightly different in that regard, but at the end of the day, the commissioner of police still has to be able to have some sort of control over the officers that fall under him. And if it is morale and everything else is low and the chain of command is broken down, then how can he properly manage a TTPS?
Well, you'll come after, right?
Yes.
Fundamental question, Mr. De Freitas. With these things pointed out, for the first time, I believe, the previous reports didn't get really into the belly of the beast. They actually did some interviews, read 1 or 2 little documents, and given the time that they had, even at great expense, they didn't get the kind of data that we strenuously tried to acquire. The police service is run now, in spite of all the things we have said, by sheer authority. There is a kind of level of authority. A sergeant authorizes this. The inspector instructs that to be done, and it is done. But the quality of the response is what is missing. And even though there might be 1 or 2 good things here and there, it could be done much, much better if the human resource elements are in proper and effective place. That is not so. So in answer to your question, we all wonder, how is the police service surviving? It is surviving by the sheer authority of the hierarchy. Mainly so, because as you would know, if an inspector tells a constable to do something and so on, you do it mechanically, but not to the quality level that we expect. And it's quite evident in terms of the detection rate, response to citizens' complaints and so on. So in your answer, it's a mechanical exercise without any demonstrable quality output in it. You're trying to correct that now, I suppose. Dr. Guy wanted to make a point, Chairman.
Yes. With all the, our discussions on HR, one of the most salient points that I have noticed reviewing some of the documents after we've done a lot of the stakeholder meetings and all this stuff, individuals in positions acting. You listen to the police officers, all ranks you have acting, people, individuals acting. And therefore, in many cases, when someone is acting, there's that sense of authority. When you are confirmed in a position, it's completely different from when you're acting. And that is one of the things. You go to the stations, you have an acting sergeant, an acting corporal. And I think the only thing you don't have that's not acting is the constable. So in that sense, when you speak of morale, there is no, in terms of, you have a commissioner presently who is acting, I think I just found out, it's probably like 6 times, just renewal, this renewal of this. So that has a lot to do with morale. When I looked at some of the statistics on, I don't have the actual numbers, but if you would go through the document, you have promotions. You have people complain that in terms of promotions and fairness. You're looking at appraisals where you have people who have not been, you have not had appraisals for 2-3 years. You have individuals who would like to have more civilians working alongside them. You have the technology. Technology is available to senior ranks and not to the junior ranks. Not, in proportion, it's not available. You have communication. It's indicated that between the lower ranks and the upper ranks, you have, the communications is not so good. But among the senior ranks, you have, really decent communication among them. Abuse of sick leave, abuse of overtime, vacation leave where someone takes vacation leave or sick leave and goes to an institution and studies and becomes a lawyer or whatever. You have individuals, you have police officers complaining that sick leave is abused, vacation leave. Who allows an individual to have leave that's accumulated for 2 or 3 years? Who is responsible for that? Somebody has to take responsibility for that. And at the same time, if you have an individual who is acting, he's just sitting there acting for if it's 3-4 years, and he's not making any serious decisions. So these are the issues that must be taken into account. We are saying HR, but we are saying HR, in a very nebulous sense. But HR, the root cause of, I can see most of the problems within the police service is individuals are not being confirmed in their positions.
But if I could jump in, and again, I asked the difficult question earlier about leadership and discipline. Now, we know we have the issues with regard to the commissioner, and that has been ventilated. But if I understand all that acting that you're talking about and the ability, again, Mr. Philip, you guide me if I'm wrong, but why are there so much acting? Isn't it not the authority of the commissioner, and the commissioner could appoint people to the positions so that if he wants to make sure that people are not acting, that could be fixed within the police service? I see the level of police that are on suspensions, all right? And the things that are, so the things that you are talking about and the breakdown in systems and procedures, it's no different. I come from a banking background, and I've worked in a bank with proper systems and procedures that are adhered to. I also worked in a bank where systems and procedures were not adhered to. The bank where systems and procedures were not adhered to, the reason why it failed was because of leadership, and it ended up being a failed institution. There are banks where you have systems and procedures where disciplinary procedures are carried out and things happen, and it is because of the leadership and the discipline of the institution. So all the processes are there to be followed. I agree with you when you said, and I was glad to see that 9,000 people with degrees want to get into the police service because the police service is supposedly attractive. So then it's not a problem of the quality of people that we are getting in, but yet still we have a system when you are in there where morale, and that's your findings, clear. Morale is low, employee engagement is low, perception of the public is low. So there is something inside that institution that is causing that. And all the things you talk about, to me, leads to leadership in the institution that has fallen down, and people are not leading and taking action. I will also go to the point, and I just will also like the committee members to give me, when you look at 307 officers on disciplinary, just look at that, on disciplinary matters. That is causing the country, I did a maths of it, and it's over $300 million of money that is being spent as a result of having those individuals. And then when you look at the reasons why, you're seeing that the tribunal, which is made up of police officers, people are not being, it wouldn't take much from a leadership perspective if that is happening. Take some officers away, put them to do the tribunal, say this is your job for the next 6 months, have the tribunal every day, and let's clean up the background. That's a leadership position to take. That is not, that's a problem, but it's a problem that could be fixed within the police service with leadership decisions. So I think the problem stems from just reading the whole report. You have people in leadership positions who do not want to lead and who do not want to take hard disciplinary actions to ensure that the police service and the people who are in the police service follow systems and procedures, use the technology that is given to them because it's there, and just lead.
Just a quick addition to that, Mr. Chair.
And therefore the question, Mr. Phillip, the question is, what is the reason in your view for this never-ending and growing acting scenario? What would you think is the main reason throughout the organization why there are so many acting appointments? Seems like they're stuck there.
And my question is related to yours and Member Lehans. Are the mechanisms within the police service today, inclusive of regulations, PCA aside, adequate in terms of ensuring and applying disciplinary assessments and measures?
Mr. Phillip, you would know best. What in your view?
Oh, sorry.
What in your view, Mr. Phillip, is the main reason for this situation with the acting positions in the police organization?
Well, there are several reasons why there are acting positions at different ranks within the police service, right? So we won't speak about what the police service commission is responsible for. That is the deputy commissioner and commissioner of police, for which they haven't held anything since about 2000. I was a ACP in 2011. So since 2011, this is the first time that they have had an opportunity to hold any kind of interviews for the post of deputy commissioner. So it starts with there. So they have their role there. In terms of the
Right.
General.
For the benefit of the public, you were saying, as it relates to the commissioner and the office of commissioner and office of deputy, that is the responsibility of the police service commissioner.
Yes.
And they have not for a number of years engaged the promotion or recruitment process.
Yes, to the best of my knowledge, since about 2011.
One is now ongoing.
Yes.
So that's a separate issue.
Yes.
Right, but as for assistant commissioner and down to constable, the commissioner of police is responsible for that.
Yes.
And we are talking about the acting in that cadre.
Yes.
Okay.
And the commissioner of police have in fact over a number of periods, because there is a particular process within each rank. They have to do the promotion exams, then they have the interviews, the assessment board, up to the rank of, to be promoted to the rank of corporal, straight up to inspector. We have the police assessment board, the police assessment board, and then from the rank, from assistant superintendent, to be promoted from the rank of assistant superintendent to assistant commissioner, we have an assessment center.
Yes.
A number of these, the promotion boards have been held. However, in quite a number of instances, we did have a number of legal matters, people taking the commissioner to the court, and we had some setbacks. However, as recent as about 2016 up to last year, we had quite a considerable amount of promotion from corporal straight up to, let us say, to inspector. However, within the last 2 years, there was some delays with respect to the assessment center for several reasons. Either through the tendering process, when the tenders were in fact submitted to the Central Tenders Board, because the process is over $1 million. There were one or two issues in terms of either information that was supplied in one instance, and then based on, in this particular instance, where we have, because the tender is in fact open and we have international, like the same Miami-Dade situation, which I shouldn't speak about because this matter is still engaging. There are some contractual aspects in terms of jurisdiction, in terms of the contract. If you're engaging through the Solicitor General, because we have to use it, the contract should be in accordance with Trinidad and Tobago laws, and they haven't been party with a local firm. There are some issues there, but we are working all that. So there were one or two failures, and that has in fact caused the system from assistant superintendent to assistant commissioner not having a promotion over the last 2 years for those things. So we have exhausted filling the vacancies previously, but over the last 2 years, we got stymied. But, and the process is drawn out because this last process has in fact been taking place almost about 8 months now, and the contract has not yet been signed. So there are a number of issues. However, we have cleared up the backlog in terms of the promotion between corporal to inspector. For a matter of fact, we have a list of officers who were to be promoted to the rank of sergeant, and just as that was about to happen, again, because of officers' ability to take action, legal action, they took us to court, and that in fact have kept back this last, where we wanted to fill some vacancies in the rank of sergeant. So that matter is in fact before the court.
Right. So the public can glean from what you have said in simple terms that promotions between the rank or from the rank of corporal to inspector, corporal to sergeant, sergeant to inspector, that has been stymied by legal action on
Generally, we have had
dissatisfied officers who have queries about the promotion system. They get injunctions, it blocks the whole process, and that is what led to this acting situation for all through those years. And in respect of the promotion from assistant superintendent to assistant commissioner of police, you have an assessment center where you have to contract a firm in order to do that. And there have been some stasis because of contractual issues and legal issues and tendering issues, much like the fast ferry to Tobago, over and over again.
Well, I'm hoping that we don't associate it to that.
So I think now we understand better the main reason. It might not be all, but we now understand the main reasons for this very permanent and unfortunate state of acting. And the persons who are made to act from corporal to inspector, they would have had to pass their promotion exam to be able to act. And those in the league of the assessment center, from assistant superintendent to assistant commissioner, there's no exam to pass.
No, but there's the assessment center process.
So how are they made to act higher up without, as happened in the lower ranks, passing an exam or something akin to that?
Well, certainly based on performance and recommendations.
And seniority and recommendations.
Yes, and recommendations.
Right. And then finally, it is our information that you have persons acting not only to the higher rank, but even ranks above that. For an example, you can have assistant superintendent substantive rank acting not only as superintendent, but as senior superintendent. So there are people acting 2 ranks up.
Yes, as happened in my case, I'm acting 2 ranks up as of today. So I am an assistant commissioner. I act as a deputy commissioner, but I'm now performing the duties as a commissioner.
And
so it happens.
It's a quite untenable state of affairs. It's not good for the organization, as we have all agreed, but that's the reality. Member Oliveri.
Now, as a committee, you have done an in-depth study into the organization that is the TTPS. You understand the nature of the beast. You've identified a lot of issues and you have produced copious recommendations. Now, understanding exactly how that organization, the TTPS, operates, what would you recommend as a suitable implementation strategy for these recommendations to be implemented? Would you propose a separate team going into the TTPS and implementing the recommendations? Would you propose an in-house team or some sort of hybrid structure? But how can we take this document, this list of recommendations, and have something actually implemented, so at the end of it we know that your work was not in vain and the TTPS would be fixed, for want of a better word, at the end of the process?
Well, Chairman, may I? In moving forward, if I recall, one of the last recommendations we made was to establish an appropriately expert team to examine the various recommendations, and following from that, put the recommendations into different components in terms of the relationship with one another. And going downstream again, you examine each component in terms of its application. For example, which ones require special majority, which one requires simple majority in Parliament, what are resources required, what the timeline should be, because given the complexity of these different components, you might have different timelines. And briefly, that is a strategy I would adopt, because this exercise cannot be largely an in-house exercise. It is my respectful view, Mr. Chairman, we have to demonstrate to the public that the time for action is now. And I've been repeating that mantra all over the place, echoing the Prime Minister's view. And I believe what the Prime Minister's intent is. I respect that. And we will do everything within our means to encourage the fulfillment of that pledge that he made. So in a nutshell, that is the strategy. Because as you can see from here, and Mr. Mitchell's inquiry, and Mr. De Freitas and Paul Richards and Mr. Lee Hunt, there are some complexities in certain issues that need to be worked out, and we'll have to have a studied approach apart from what we have done here together as a committee and as a joint select committee. So that is the way forward. There are some very serious recommendations, and we have to set timelines now after this meeting. I would expect that the joint select committee develop a strategy to present to the cabinet, and with timelines and the appropriate personnel and resources, and put in a special office with the appropriate support and infrastructure to start reframing and giving it to the cabinet and the parliament for quick, appropriate action. I don't know if the other members might have a higher wisdom than what I have said. I invite them to make any additions now. Alan, Mr. Miguel?
Professor, some of the very recommendations themselves would actually assist in improving the police service. Like, for example, the whole idea of a police inspectorate, that will help the implementation of the recommendations. And likewise, maybe, you see, and then it has to be phased, because if we're thinking about tackling the Police Service Commission and perhaps improving their efficiency and so on, all of it will be down to improving the police service. So quite apart from having an implementation strategy, the very implementation of some of the recommendations raised here will in fact help to implement some of the proposals.
Zamir? No, I'm good.
It's just past 6 p.m. It is about the time that we had looked at, second look, for bringing our proceedings today to a close. When you began, Professor Deosaran, you raised some of the key issues: corruption, discipline, the HR system, promotion, appraisals, integration of the intelligence units, the cameras, technology, and you went down a list. And I think based on the discussions we had today, we touched very heavily on the HR system. We touched on promotion issue. We touched on the question of selection and recruitment. We touched on the question of training. We touched on the question of discipline. I think largely we dealt with those issues. But there are still some items, and Mr. Miguel raised one, a major one first, the question of governance, which we have not yet traversed. And I say so to suggest that it might very well be that we may want to enjoy the benefit of your company to touch on that and a couple other issues again. Because this exercise is not purely for the benefit of this committee which must make recommendations to the Parliament for implementation. But this committee, parliamentary as it is largely as well for the benefit of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago and others who are interested in what we are doing. So while we have had the benefit of reading the report, as I indicated earlier, we would like to have some of these discussions further ventilated for the benefit of public consumption. In that regard, if only for that, because all of your recommendations are already with us, we would want to invite you at an appropriate stage and promptly, again, to treat with some of those other matters, and I think that should suffice. I hope you would find it in your hearts of gold, given your track record in public service, to be willing to so accommodate us in very short order to deal with those other aspects of the list of your key issues and some of your findings. Do I have your concurrence, Professor?
You'll be doing so in-house or public meeting or?
Well, this is a public meeting.
I know, but the follow-up you're speaking about.
I think we can do that. We will do that in similar terms. Unless, of course, if you have some good reason why we shouldn't. No, which we will be willing to hear off camera.
No one speaking on behalf of the committee members. I think we'll be willing,
Yes, it's all public, very public. I do feel for the police organization in this regard because very often it finds itself under public scrutiny. But I am bold enough to say the issues that have been identified by Paul Richards, Robert Leigh Hunt, Randall Mitchell, Nigel De Freitas, Nicole Oliveri, all of us, they are replicated in all aspects of the governance of this country, you know. From ministry to ministry, portfolio to portfolio, we know that. But the police service comes into sharp focus, but they will know, and we will know, and the country must know, this kind of thing, weak HR systems, discipline issues and all of that, confidentiality and all of that, it's replicated across the structure. There's a lot to fix in Trinidad and Tobago. But in front of us is the police organization, and we'll deal with it. So, I would like, Professor, to invite you to make any quick closing comments as we bring this session to a close.
Quick, that's the magic.
I thank you.
Word. I wish to thank you on behalf of the committee members and all the members who have listened and spoken such patiently, because we are all on the same page about the seriousness of this issue and the challenges facing the government, the parliament, in executing the recommendations, whichever ones chosen, in the most expeditious and thoughtful manner. The way we see ourselves, that we are working in the public interest, because you cannot have a public so largely distressed and discontented with the police service for too long. Even the police service recognizes that. Many of their plans are directed against or for building public confidence. So it's very distressing for us, and I'm quite sure for members of parliament, to find out quite reliably the low level of public confidence in the police. No matter what they do, they have a challenge of perception. They have to change public perception by being a high performance. So we are happy to be part of the exercise in improving the police service. As I said earlier, Mr. Chairman, we come as an ambulance, but we are not magicians, because some of the recommendations will take some deeper thinking and some careful planning to execute. So on behalf of the members, we thank you all for listening, and the further assistance you require, the members and myself are very willing to contribute. There's one element that disturbs me personally. Whenever we have these public meetings, we find in the media they select one or two of the most sensational issues and therefore discolor the whole exercise by misguided public opinion. And I think that is a bothersome issue over which we have little or no control. So that is why I made mention of whether it's public or in chamber. Because it appears quite mischievous as time to hear they're taking out a single issue out of 100 recommendations and speaking so disparagingly about one or two of them. It doesn't do the country any good. But of course, you know the issue with patriotism in this country. It doesn't have the full coverage we expect at this time of our development. So we are willing to help, and the answer I gave you now quickly is yes. When you're ready, just issue the invitation to us, and I expect at that time we would have a fuller house.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And as a politician, I concur with the last element of your submission in respect of the sensationalization. But I told you there's a lot that needs fixing in our country, but we'll focus on what is in front of us. Members, is there any comment, anyone's suggestion, any thought you'd like to express? It appears not, and therefore we would like this committee, we would like to thank you very, very sincerely for your attendance before us this afternoon, and we will certainly be communicating with you for our next meeting, and we will give thought to the last submissions that you made in respect of the sensationalization, and it might very well be. So I would like to thank you very much, and here bring this meeting to a close. Thank you very much, and good night. Members, we must sit around for a little while longer to fix our next date and so on. Thank you very much.